All right, good morning, man. Today we begin again in our book, Disciplines of a Godly Man. And today we're going to be finishing up chapter 3. This was a chapter of the book called The Discipline of Marriage. And this has been a real good chapter in a lot of different areas for me. It's been a great reminder. It's been very challenging. I hope it has been for you as well. Maybe just to give you a little introduction on what we talked about. Remember, we talked kind of specifically about sacrificial love, and then we talked about a sanctifying love, and then we talked about a self-love. That was a big portion of our chapter the first couple of days that we were in this one. After self-love came the ideas of discipline, like what specific disciplines can we take into our marriage. And we talked about a couple of these yesterday. One of those disciplines was the word commitment, and the following discipline was the word fidelity. And today we begin again in this chapter with the word of communication. Communication is the next discipline. So let's begin there. And today we're going to finish this chapter, and I'm going to take some time to go over the discussion questions with you at the end. And I think, generally speaking, the most amount of time you're going to be thinking about this chapter will be with those discussion questions and trying to answer those. So keep that in mind as we continue down the road. All right, so communication. Recently, the readers of a popular women's magazine were asked the question, if you could change your husband, what would you change? The overwhelming consensus was that they would like them to communicate better. They indicated that, even more, they would like their husbands to listen. Eugene Peterson remarks, the stereotype is the husband buried in the morning newspaper at breakfast, preferring to read a news agency's report of the latest scandal in European government, the scores of yesterday's athletic contests, and the opinions of a couple of columnists whom he will never meet, rather than listen to the voice of the person who has just shared his bed, poured his coffee, and fried his eggs, even though listening to that live voice promises love and hope, emotional depth, and intellectual exploration far in excess of what he can gather informationally from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Christian Science Monitor put together. Wow. Men, the discipline of communication demands that you set aside regular time to talk, and that you really do talk, and that you communicate more than facts, that you communicate feelings, that you learn to talk in metaphors and similes with phrases that begin, I feel like, ... And it means that you listen. The Harvard Business Review recommends that 65% of an executive's time should be spent listening. How much more so the wise husband? So that is the discipline of communication. First, commitment. Second, fidelity. Thirdly, communication. And then the next one is elevation. Mr. Hughes writes, next, I strongly recommend the discipline of elevation. Winston Churchill once attended a formal banquet in London where the dignitaries were asked the question, if you could not be who you are, who would you like to be? Naturally, everyone was curious as to what Churchill, who was seated next to his beloved Clemmy, would say. After all, Churchill could not be expected to say Julius Caesar or Napoleon. When it finally came Churchill's turn, the old man, the last respondent to the question, rose and gave his answer. He said, if I could not be who I am, I would most like to be, and here he paused to take his wife's hand, Lady Churchill's second husband. The old boy made some points that night, but he also said it for everyone who had a good marriage. A commitment to building up your wife is of greatest importance. Men, if you think what your wife does is less important than what you do, you are wrong, and you have big problems. Compliments on her kindness and her daily provisions should be a commonplace, as should showing her respect by observing common courtesies. The next discipline is deference. Along with this, the discipline of deference must be carefully practiced. Many men never forego planned pleasure for the sake of their wives. For some men, golf is synonymous to Dante's Paradiso, but the entrance to department store is like the gates of Dante's hell, bearing the inscription, "Abandon all hope, all ye who enter here." End quote. But if you love your wife, there must be times when you forsake the heavenly greens because you value her interests and simply love her. Then there's the discipline of time and romance. Lastly, I must mention the discipline of time and romance. Years ago in the Midwest, a farmer and his wife were lying in bed during a storm when the funnel of a tornado suddenly lifted their roof right off their house and sucked their bed away with them still in it. The wife began to cry, and the farmer called to her that it was no time to cry. She called back that she was so happy she could not help it. It was the first time they had been together in 20 years. In 1986, Psychology Today did a survey of 300 couples, asking them what keeps them together. One of the major staying factors was time spent together. Make sure you maintain this priority. Your calendar reveals what is important to you, so write her calendar into yours. Schedule weekly times together that do not just happen. Be creative. Date. Surprise her. Be extravagant. Man, when was the last time you opened the door for her and said, "I love you," or complimented her, or wrote her a loving note, or sent her flowers, or dated her? Just gave her extra special attention. Edna St. Vincent Millay said, "'Tis not love's going hurts my days, but that it went in little ways." Many other disciplines could be named, most of which are implicit with what we have said. For example, tenderness, sensitivity, patience. But the bottom line is to work at it. In the fire of new love, marriage seems as easy as falling off a log. Actually, it is as easy as staying on a log. It requires careful attention, developed skill, and work. Men, are you working on the second most important relationship of your life? God is first, but she is second. Are you working on it with sweat? Because no perspiration is no progress. No pain is no gain. Let us bow down to God's word. As 1 Corinthians 16, 13, and 14 says, act like men. Be strong. Let all that you do be done in love. So discipline yourself for the purpose of godliness. So here's our food for thought, and I'm praying that you take extra time to think about these questions. Let's begin right at the top. Do you agree with Mike Mason's analogy between marital love and death? Why or why not? What does your love for your wife demand of you? Are you willing to pay the price? Do you generally feel what your wife is feeling? Her joys and sorrows, her mountain peaks and deep valleys? What can you do to let her know that you want to connect with her emotionally and spiritually? Praying is the marital work of a Christian husband. Do you agree? How often do you pray for your wife with her or with her? What can you do to make this more of a habit? What are you doing currently to help your wife draw closer to Christ? List at least 6 specific things you will do within the next 2 weeks to help your wife grow spiritually. What happens to a marriage if a husband doesn't love himself? What does it really mean to love oneself biblically? How will such an attitude show itself practically? How do Colossians 3:14 and 1 Corinthians 16:13 and 14 apply to your marriage? And be specific. Application and response. What did God speak to you about most specifically, most powerfully in this chapter? Talk to him about it right now. And lastly, think about it. Read Ephesians 5:22 through 33. Then write a few paragraphs on the spiritual meaning of Christian marriage. What do the wife's submission and the husband's love have to do with one another? What does the relationship of Christ and his church teach you about your marriage? Guys, what I'll do is I'll put these final questions at the end of today's or in the description box of today's video, so that way you can have them and you can look at them right away. Again, I hope that you'll continue on in the book with me. We're in chapter 4 tomorrow, and it's the discipline of fatherhood. So we're definitely looking forward to that. All right, guys, God bless you. Have a good day with the Lord. Take care. Bye-bye.